An overview of how the ERP software industry is changing and evolving, how Gartner predicts that 40% of Agentic AI projects will be canceled by 2027, and why ERP projects fail. Those are just a few of the things we'll cover here in episode 268 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you.
3, 2, 1.
Ground control is a major fun.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 268. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So today's topic, this is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, all the tech agnostic aspects of digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. You can find new episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. In today's episode, we're going to cover a lot of different things. We're going to get to some questions from social media. We'll talk about some newsworthy opening topics. First of which is Gartner predicts over 40% of Agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027, and how SAP is already shifting away from ERP migration. So be curious to hear more about that. And then later in the show, we will have a guest on. Her name is Kristin Valentyn. She's worked for several different ERP software vendors over the years. She's going to be on the show talking about an overview of the ERP software industry, how it's evolving, how it's changing, what you need to know, how the different vendors are addressing cloud and AI, and all the stuff you need to know as a potential ERP customer in the future. And then last but not least, later in the show, we'll talk about why ERP projects fail. And the spoiler alert of why ERP projects fail is you need to follow the money to understand why the projects fail. So we'll get into that later in the show as well. So before we get to all that, though, Darian, what are some of the questions you have from social media for us here today?
Yeah, the first question today is, Eric, how do you tell the difference between legitimate modernization pressure and vendor manufactured panic?
Well, I think you're always going to have a certain amount of vendor manufactured panic or vendor manufactured urgency. That's just a given in the industry. So I think you have to set that aside as background noise and a constant in the industry. So I think the good news is it's nothing new. It's a matter of first and foremost recognizing what your needs are and what you're trying to accomplish. And then when the time makes sense for you and when you find that you're getting diminishing ROI on your current investments, that's where it probably makes sense to start thinking about longer term what you might be doing to modernize those systems. Now, some might say, you should be doing it now. If you're not doing it now, you might be falling behind. There might be some truth to that, but the reality is most organizations are pretty slow in their adoption of technology, relatively speaking. So I'm not saying you necessarily need to wait forever, but you certainly don't need to move faster than you're capable of or than you're ready to. And especially when you factor in opportunity costs and investment opportunity costs, things that you could be investing that same money in, you have to prioritize your backbone ERP technologies just like you would any sort of capital investment and prioritize accordingly. So I think as long as you do those things and you've got a clear, deliberate plan and strategy and it makes sense for your priorities, then you can set aside the background noise of vendor pressure and do it on your own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question today has to do with something we talked about a couple weeks ago, but it's with NVIDIA now positioning itself as the platform layer for enterprise AI agents. Are we heading toward a world where a handful of companies control the entire enterprise AI stack from chips to agents? Should that worry CIOs?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I would worry CIOs. I just think it's something that you should definitely be aware of and just understand is that, there's a lot of blurring lines between infrastructure and applications. And that's one thing I want to touch upon with Kristin later in the episode too, as we talk about Oracle and other software vendors that are not only providing applications, but they're also providing infrastructure, and some infrastructure providers are now providing applications and AI tools and things of that nature. So I don't know if I'd be worried. I guess you just like any decision, have to recognize the risks, rewards, and trade-offs and understand that there is a risk with getting too locked into one vendor potentially. So that to me is the larger risk than the fact that NVIDIA is providing chips and AI agents all at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Super interesting. But I want to get into our first article here and switch gears. We're going to talk about SAP and how they're pivoting their commercial strategy away from the cloud ERP migration push that has defended them. And I know we've talked about a lot for the past few years now. So what this article was saying is the numbers tell the story. So SAP's 2025 on-premise support revenue target was 8.5 billion, but actual results came in at 10.5 billion, a 2 billion shortfall against their own migration projections. From 2021 to 2024, on-premise support revenue declined just 2%, far slower than what SAP originally predicted. Their CEO is now establishing a new customer value group led by Thomas Sarastring. Sorry, Thomas, if I pronounced your last name wrong. With hundreds of people focused on driving AI adoption and usage-based pricing models instead of the traditional migration deals. So why this matters, this is a tactic admission that SAP's move to the cloud or get left behind narrative hasn't played out the way the company or the industry, maybe besides you, Eric, expected. Customers aren't migrating at the pace SAP projected, and Gartner estimates that over 10,000 SAP customers will still be running legacy ECC systems beyond 2030, even though mainstream support ends in 2027. Rather than doubling down on migration pressure, SAP is now pivoting to monetize its existing customer base through AI licensing, business data, cloud, and broader portfolio upselling. ERP consultant Aslar Batch of Dragon ERP described the new strategy bluntly, saying getting ECC customers into the cloud can start upselling AI licensing, business data cloud, upsell. The shift also signals that rip and replace modernization approaches have proven ineffective at scale, and the industry is moving towards brownfield migrations and incremental modernization instead. So, Eric, I don't know if this comes as a major surprise to you, but I wanted to get your take on it, and then I have a couple of questions to follow up on about this.
It actually does surprise me. I didn't realize a lot of what you just said. Most of that is new to me. I didn't know. First of all, the Gartner's predicting. He said 30% of customers will still be on premise after 2030. I think is what he said.
This 10,000 customers.
Or 10,000, I'm sorry. Oh, the 30 was 2030, 10,000 customers. That's still a lot. So that's a lot of customers that I don't know what percentage that is, but that's a pretty big number. And I think it's interesting that, and I think it's actually really smart if this is all true and SAP sticks with the strategy. I think it's what they should have been doing all along. Because what's happening now is I think they're creating too big of a chasm between the ECC customers and where they are today versus where SAP wants them to be with S4HANA. And it's not to say you can't guide them towards S4HANA public cloud long term. I think that's still the right approach for SAP. And if I were SAP or an investor in SAP, which I'm not, I would strongly advocate for that. So I don't blame them for wanting to get customers in the cloud, but the way in which they've done it has been, I think, it's a self-inflicted wound strategically and in terms of their own goodwill and perception in the marketplace. But I think the other problem they've been having is they're losing a lot of that maintenance that they're still making off ECC customers. They're starting to lose some of that as some customers move to third-party maintenance and or some customers decide, I'm just going to go a totally different direction from SAP because I don't want to do SAP Rise or I don't want to go to public cloud or whatever. So they end up, in some cases, going to Oracle or Microsoft or best of breed composable system. So I think it's actually smart of them because I think they're going to turn away a lot less people now, and they're probably going to keep their legacy customers more entrenched in the SAP ecosystem. It's just that now SAP is meeting them where they are, and now you can start to bring them back to where you always wanted them to go, which is to S4HANA public cloud. So I think it's actually very smart. I commend them for doing that. I hope they stick with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing I found interesting about this article is them saying they're creating the new customer value group with hundreds of people focused on AI adoption. When a vendor creates a team specifically to drive adoption for their AI products, should customers see that as true support or as a sales motion dressed up as customer success? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly not a bad thing. It's something that SAP has always done to their credit. I mean, they always have had like a value engineering group. For a long time, they had this group that was like a consulting group almost that would go in and help you figure out how to use their technology to get more value out of your organization. So I think it's it's just another extension of something they've always done. Other vendors do it too, but SAP has actually been pretty good. As much as I do knock SAP at times, there are some things they do really well. And I think that whole value engineering and now the AI adoption group, I think that's something that's very smart because if you think about it, SAP for better or for worse, is a very complex product. It can do a lot of different things, and people get lost in it. It's easy to get lost in the solution because there's so much there, and it's so hard for an organization to consume it all. And most of the time, we find that companies are using S/4HANA or SAP legacy systems fine. They weren't necessarily implemented poorly, but it's a lot of shelfware. It's stuff that's just sitting there. People don't know about certain functionality. They never deployed certain modules. So I think this is just a good way to make sure that post-implementation or post-purchase, customers are actually getting the value they expect. And I imagine this same group will help them sell more AI solutions as well, if I'm just basing it on what SAP has done in the past with their value engineering group.
Absolutely, that makes sense. And one last question I have about this is, if SAP is shifting to usage-based pricing model for AI capabilities, how should enterprise buyer model the total cost of ownership? Could usage-based AI pricing end up being more expensive than traditional licensing for high volume operations?
Yeah, I think this is the big hidden below the iceberg issue with AI in general, not just with SAP, but with any ERP or enterprise tech vendor. Is the pricing long term to me is very uncertain, and it's the only certain thing about pricing is that today is the lowest it's going to be. The cost of AI is just going to go up. Right now, it's sort of like when Amazon was first building out their massive infrastructure. They were willing to take massive losses for years just to build the infrastructure to get customers hooked on Amazon Prime and fast deliveries and stuff like that. So they lost money for years and years and years before they ever turned a profit. Now, in the case of Amazon, they have such massive scale and it's consumer facing, so they didn't necessarily raise prices as a result. But I think the ERP vendors are doing something similar in that they're getting people locked in. They're deploying all these AI agents to where the switching costs will be high, and they will need to recoup the cost of their large, huge data center and AI investments somehow. And it just sucks up a lot of data, a lot of computing power to do all the stuff we're doing with AI right now. So I think that's something that CIOs, CFOs, and executives should be aware of, is that you have to understand there's a lot of cost uncertainty around what the cost of AI is going to be, especially if you start moving to usage-based. Because one thing, at least user-based in the past, you could control that. I can decide that if I add 100 people, I'm going to add 100 licensees or 100 subscriptions to software. With AI, though, you don't necessarily have control or insights or visibility into how much consumption or how much you're actually consuming. And a lot of times you don't have control over it because your people have the tools and they can do whatever they want with it. And so now you're going to create a situation where, it's easy to see that spiraling out of control if you don't have the right governance in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting with SAP, but I want to get into another topic about Agentic AI and how Gartner predicts that over 40% of those projects will be canceled by the end of 2027, which I feel like is very soon. So this headline caught my attention. It says that primarily due to escalating costs, unclear business value, and inadequate risk controls, that's what they predict, that 40% of enterprise Agentic AI projects will be canceled by the end of 2027. However, early adopters who invest in proper architecture are achieving average 171% ROI, 192% in the US specifically. But that gap between success and failure comes down to 4 fundamental layers most organizations don't have, which is data architecture, governance, orchestration, and human interface design. So why all this matters, the prediction comes at a stark contrast with the hype cycle around platforms like NVIDIA's Agent Toolkit, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, and Salesforce Agentforce. While vendors are racing to launch agent capabilities, Gartner's research suggests that most organizations lack the foundational infrastructure to make these agents work. The architecture problem is primarily acute. Agents require high-quality, structured, accessible data across enterprise systems, exactly the condition that most companies don't have after years of fragmented digital transformation or other things going on. Hidden cost drivers are also emerging, including high-frequency API calls at scale, custom connectors for legacy systems, and ongoing monitoring and incident repurpose expenses that weren't originally in the business case. Customer service automation shows faster returns than back-office processes, where errors can accumulate before detection. Implementation timelines range from 12 months for the narrow use cases to 2 to 4 years for complex deployments. So overall, the key takeaways that I got from this article were the 40% cancellation rate isn't a combination of Agentic AI itself it's the 171% ROI for well-architectured deployments is compelling, but rather a warning that organizations are treating AI agents as software purchase rather than architectural transformation. And the ones that get the foundation wrong can definitely fail in a very expensive way. So Eric, with this, one question I have for you is if 40% of agentic AI projects will be canceled, what are the warning signs that a project is heading toward failure, and what should a CIO look for at month 3 versus maybe month 12?
Yeah, well, I think when you're looking at month 3 in the shorter term, you need to be real focused, on pilots or identifying areas of innovation where you could be using AI, and it's more it's focused, but it's also experimental. I mean, you're experimenting, you're trying different use cases of how you might use AI, and you're going to have some failures. You're going to try some that work. Some use cases just don't make sense, or they're not something that could scale, or whatever. It's too disruptive. And so I think just having a clear plan for how you're going to do that and siphon through the low value stuff versus the high value stuff. And then by month 12, obviously you should be focused on doubling down on the things that have been working and the things you're trying to scale out across the organization. I'm kind of surprised that, 40% will potentially get canceled, in that period of time. And I imagine it's probably not an all or nothing, like either it's canceled or it's not. I mean, there might be some initiatives that get canceled within the same organization that also, decides to move forward with others. But I think it's part of it makes a lot of sense in some ways because it is such a maturing technology. It's such an uncertain technology and it's such a disruptive technology that it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of trial and error that comes along with that.
Absolutely. And I found the interesting part of this one, or at least one of the parts that I found interesting, was the hidden costs, like for high frequency API calls and the custom legacy connectors that keep surprising these organizations that are deploying these agents. Is agentic AI business case fundamentally undercosted right now? Are vendors being transparent about the total cost of ownership, or what do you think is happening here?
I don't think we know what the cost of AI is going to be. I mean, I think that, we were talking about the consumption-based pricing a moment ago. There's just so many different pricing models that software vendors are pursuing, and even like software vendors or ERP software vendors that are moving clients to the cloud. You have two major material costs that are uncertain in the future. One being cloud. As the cloud costs increase, so does AI costs. So you've got AI costs and cloud costs as sort of a double whammy that are going to likely increase the cost of consumption or the cost of computing in general in the future. So I think AI, though, you look at what Oracle and SAP and some of these big, Microsoft, some of these big vendors are spending on their data centers and their infrastructure. It's just massive, massive amounts of money being spent right now. And they have yet to even come close to recouping those costs. So at some point, as this whole cycle matures, the prices have to go up. That's the only way they could possibly go. So I think how much they go up, that's the big wild card, the big question that we're going to have to keep an eye on. But I think it's a tricky situation too, because AI has the power to deliver so much value. But the question is going to be, are companies going to be able to afford it? Are they going to be able to invest or have the appetite to see their AI costs, their cloud costs, their overall consumption costs increasing materially over time? I don't know. We'll have to see.
Absolutely. And my last question I have for this article for you, Eric, is customer service shows faster ROI than maybe back office automation a lot of the times. Should organizations start with customer facing agents and work backward, or does that create a paved path to nowhere if the back office data isn't ready?
Good question. I mean, it's you could start with your customer facing side of things, but you're right. You're paving a path faster to potentially get to bad information or bad processes faster. So your customer service is now, okay, they've got better insights, better visibility into broken data or broken processes. That's not necessarily helpful. So I think it's a matter of looking at an end-to-end process potentially and saying, if I do automate the customer facing side of things, is there something I need to automate or use AI to improve on the inventory availability, the inventory management, the distribution, so that, customers actually get the stuff faster. It's not going to do you any good to tell the customer faster or give them bad news faster that you can't fulfill an order. So I think that's the way to look at it, as an end-to-end process, and making sure that you look at how AI could be used just in that one process. But I think you're onto something there, where you don't want to automate something that just exposes broken stuff underneath the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting topics today, but I'm really excited to get into our conversation with Kristin.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to bring Kristin on the show. She's been on this podcast before. She's been on my YouTube channel a couple times as well as a guest host or a guest on the show. But she's going to be on the show talking about an overview of the ERP software space. She's one of the few people, if not the only person I know in the industry that has worked at several different ERP vendors, several of the big name ERP providers as well, some of the mid tier providers as well. So she's got a really unique perspective from inside the vendor space, having inside how vendors work. So I want to get her perspective on the marketplace here, get her objective view after having worked with so many of these different vendors over the years. So we're going to bring her on the show in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll talk about how economic incentives and misaligned objectives between client consultants and vendors can lead to failure, and how oftentimes that is the primary driver of failure. So we're going to get into all that and more in the next few minutes. So stick around. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm Greg Benton. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer with Third Stage Consulting. And if you are embarking on your digital transformation journey or in the middle of that journey in 2026, you're going to want to see our digital transformation report. This latest edition really dives into a lot of the key trends that we're seeing in the marketplace and the ecosystem right now. It also highlights a number of the things that are happening with AI being an important component and integral part of the ERP systems that are leading the way right now. Also, the shift toward composable and best-of-breed cloud solutions is really accelerating the decline of monolithic ERP replacement. The opportunity to download the report is found at thirdstage-consulting.com. And you'll also find other tools that will help you in the initiatives and the business planning that you're doing for 2026. Don't leave phase zero without it. Reach out today.
I want to encourage you to read our Guide to Organizational Change Management. It's a free report or free guide that we published. It's one that I actually wrote that talks about best practices and lessons learned as it relates to change management. So as you know, on this podcast, we cover a lot of stuff related to the human sides of change, organizational change management, including training, communications, org design, all kinds of stuff as it relates to change management. So if you're trying to learn more about change management or you're looking for more direction and ideas on how to get started on your change management strategy and your overall journey, be sure to check out this guide. You can read it by scanning the QR code on the screen in front of you, or in the links below for this particular podcast episode. You can find a link to take you to the page that will allow you to register to go ahead and download that and read it for free. So be sure to check it out. It's the Guide to Organizational Change Management, written by yours truly. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode. Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 268. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. New episodes every Wednesday, as I mentioned, but also we're sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, an independent tech agnostic consulting firm, which is reflective of this podcast, which is also tech agnostic and independent. So much so that we are going to bring on our next guest to talk about an objective view of the ERP software industry, where the industry's headed, how the different vendors are dealing with cloud, AI, and just overall advancements and changes in the ERP space. And this is someone who has been in the space for about 30 years, worked for several different software vendors, and has a unique perspective, a very broad perspective of the industry. So with that all being said, Kristin, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And like I said, as by ways of introduction, you're someone who's worked for several different software vendors. You've had different roles. You've come up the ranks over the decades. You've seen a lot of changes, a lot of good, the bad, the ugly, all that good stuff. But tell us a little bit about your background and how you grew up in the space, and just tell us about yourself.
Well, I think that's one thing that is unique to me is I have literally worked for some of the biggest SAP Oracle, even Infor, to some very kind of niche players, as well as SMB and tier, if you will, too, with QAD, Syspro, Epicor. So it gives me a really unique perspective on all of, and it not necessarily to say the elasticity, but to really be able to focus on which ones, where, and why, because there's a lot of elements in successfully running a business, ERP being the kind of the central, circulatory system, including the heart, but which one's the right one for each company? And they all have a different perspective, all have a different value.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you've seen, like you say, you've seen it all. You've seen some of the larger tier one vendors. You've seen some of the mid-market providers as well. What are some of the biggest changes you've seen over the years in this time that you've been here in this space?
Well, it's a really interesting thing, and I think that's probably the most important factor today. And that is that, and there's some amazing people doing amazing things in development, but the long and the short of it is ERP is a commodity. It's assumed. It's no longer disruptive. It is, every company is going to have an ERP, even if they just start with financials and they're going to grow to add the rest of it. And obviously some of my development brethren are very proud of the innovations that they have in their software, but at the end of the day, it's a commodity. And so the whole market has shifted. And I think we might have talked about this the last time, where software authors could be very heavy-handed and tell what the outcome is going to be. It's really shifted now to the customers are in control. The customers have options. And, we always talked about best of breed, and then it was, singles, everything from one vendor. Well, we're now back to that expansion of best of breed because the customer is so in control. And I think relative to who do you decide to pick, I think it's really important partnership is, because at the end of the day, partnership defines if somebody's a vendor or if it's truly a partnership. And if they're a vendor, then problems become issues. And if they're a partner, problems become annoyances. Because the other thing too that's really, really changing is risk mitigation. People really can't afford to have things go really off the rails and figure it out. Cost overruns, time overruns, impact to their ability to compete in the market. So things are shifting to risk mitigation, which is founded in partnership, because if there's a strong partnership, you'll work it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up a good point, about the partnership versus vendor, or maybe even taking a step further, you're investing in a partner, not a product. And I'm wondering, in today's day and age, you sort of alluded to this, and I want to go a little deeper into it about cloud. With cloud subscriptions, you're getting more, for better or for worse, you're getting more locked into that vendor, not just the vendor and the product they provide today, but the vendor and the roadmap that they're going to be in the future. And so you have to really buy into where they're going to take the product and going to take the platform and going to take the partnership as a whole. That's a little bit different than, say, 10 or 20 years ago. It's always been a big, important decision, but I feel like it's even more important now to find that right partner and sort of put your faith in the long-term uncertainty that comes along with ERP.
Well, you brought something up a couple of years ago on one of your Stratospheres events, which are fantastic events, by the way. And I encourage everybody to attend if you can. It's really worth the commitment. But, one of the things is that, yes, cloud, in even AI, we're seeing that too. We're all racing to the stock market, if you will. And cloud really was this wonderful model, again, for investors to see consistency of software authors in terms of revenue. Predictable, repeatable, consistent. And that's really kind of the impetus of, cloud. But I will say, and you even asked me, is there really benefit? I will say today, now, absolutely there is benefit. You are limiting yourself and you're limiting your options if you're not in cloud today. Not to mention, first and foremost, you're not going to be able to take care of anything AI, period. You take advantage of anything AI if you're not in the cloud. But there's also some other things too that are equally as important to note, is if you're looking to grow, right? Whether you're running in the cloud or not is going to be a huge indicator for investment purposes. Whether that is if you're looking to get an investment to acquire, or you're looking to actually exit out and and sell your company, your valuation is always going to be higher in the cloud. So it's really important if you're very, active in the M&A space. The other place too that we're talking a lot about is the silver tsunami. Many of the people who are reticent to the cloud are also looking at retirement. So what are you going to do? You need to have an environment that continues on regardless if they're digging their toes in the sand on the beach or they're committed to another, 4 or 5 years. And then when you move into, again, back to being competitive and staying competitive in the cloud, the other issue obviously is the new workforce wants everything to swipe, point, click. And again, you're not going to get any of that when you're running, an on-prem application.
Yeah.
So I'd say those 3 elements most important.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point about the valuation of customers that are in the cloud. I think I spend a lot of time talking about the valuation of the software vendors. Obviously, they benefit in a different kind of way from migrating more of their customers to the cloud. But you have a good point that a PE firm invests in a customer, or they want to invest in a customer, and they see that they're using an old on-prem system. That's a lot less value to them than if they're using some sort of semi-standard cloud ERP system.
Well, and also it not only in terms of it, what they're running, but also who they are, and are they a business forward company or not? Because again, if you're not in the cloud, you're really not taking advantage of AI. Many of the ERPs do have inward looking. I mean, we've talked about this even so much the other day. AI is a tool that it's where you target it, where you point it. So many of the ERP, most all of them have AI in their own application. So within that context, yes, you are staying and you can use AI to a certain extent, but you're not taking advantage of everything that's out there in the world. AI really is manufacturing 5.0. And that's really where, and so are you going to invest in a company that really isn't taking advantage of the latest and greatest? That's kind of not forward thinking, but more importantly, that's not adapting.
Yeah, that's true. It's a certain form of complacency and or change resistance. In many cases, if you're not willing to upgrade. What are your thoughts on the? This is a question I feel comfortable asking only because, well, first of all, you're a very direct person, but just given where you are in your career pivot right now, is this would be an interesting question for you. Is where do you think? Do you think that the vendors are ever? And I'm asking you this as someone who's on the vendor side historically throughout your career. But do you think the vendors to some degree are forcing that a bit too much though? Like I agree with everything you just said, the valuation and the value and being current on technology. There's all benefit to that. But what about the situations where a customer is using like say, ECC or Microsoft Dynamics and an on-prem version, but it's still good enough? Do you think they're getting pushed prematurely to the cloud, or do you think it's time where every organization should be, on the latest and greatest cloud technology? Or what are your thoughts coming from the vendor side of things over the years?
Well, when you talk, what everybody seems to be really focused on right now is these kind of 0 to 20 customers or 0 to 20 users. The Fortune 1000 is pretty much locked out. I mean, on occasion, you're going to see a big company go out to bid, but that's a few times a year. The real growth continues to be in the smaller companies with the fast trajectory that basically who is going to own that install base, right? Because what they're growing so fast, their likelihood of switching. So it's amazing how quickly everybody's pivoting to get to that market. And that is throughout all of the software vendors, whether it's SAP, whether it's Oracle, they're Infor, Acumatica, is already in that space, Epicor. What's even interesting too is like Intuit is now getting into the space of offering financials to get to that market, which, so that is the kind of, if you will, the holy grail at the moment. And what's important about that space is, and we hear this over and over again, but truly, if you are not in the cloud, you're spending a lot of time figuring things out and maintaining things. And if you're a high growth company, you're going to hire, and with the importance of being really good in your space, it's, manufacturers and distributors, they're going to make their margin on that niche element that they're adding value, right? That's their thing. And that's where their margin's going to come from. So if they're going to hire people who are really, in tune with that micro vertical, they want them spending time on things like, how do I compete better in my space versus, how do I make sure everything's working together, or what's the right, they kind of just want the set it and forget it with their systems.
Yeah.
And again, that's what cloud's going to give you, is because somebody else is managing so much of that other stuff. And that's also, we hear everyone consistently say, do not worry about AI. Not only is the human factor going to be important, but again, it allows you to give up mundane tasks and actually really do focus on what's going to impact the business. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's in the Infor community, and he said this one guy does nothing but create users all day and all night. Obviously it's a large company, so,
right.
But do you think that's really rewarding work?
Yeah, that's the opposite of what you're saying as far as the ERP system being in the background, and not you can never completely set it and forget it. But I see your point there, where it's not something that should be a hindrance to doing your job better or getting the information you need. It should be the opposite of that.
Well, and, even though, we definitely have a no hire, no fire economy at this point, it still doesn't mean that people don't want meaningful work, and they don't want, and so if you've got finite resources and your talent is usually one of your highest cost items in a company, why wouldn't you have them focus on what's going to impact the business versus figuring things out and just doing nothing but maintaining systems? And,
Yeah.
and I really want to emphasize maintaining, because that keeps you where you are, doesn't necessarily prepare you for where you need to be.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of lock. Like I talk a lot about vendor lock, which is a risk of the cloud, is you get more locked into that vendor. But on the flip side, if you're not in the cloud, a lot of organizations we work with they're locked into that one or two people that have it all in their heads. They were there when they built, wrote the RPG code on the old mainframe, and they're the only ones that know how that code works. And when that person retires or goes away, that's a big knowledge drain. So that's another, that's maybe the dark side of not moving to the cloud, a form kind of the opposite of vendor lock, but just as concerning.
Well, I'd be curious what you're seeing relative to best of breed, where people are putting together in a hybrid environment. Mm-hmm. So they might have their ERP, obviously in the cloud, but they might have multiple, whether it's PLM that's linked on but a different environment. Even things as things like their MES systems, their EAM systems, because people, I did say partnership is important. Again, that customer is in control, and they can decide the right applications that they want to link. So you can be in the cloud, but not necessarily all from one vendor. Yeah. And so, and with AI and its ability to rapidly, migrate data, if you've got stuff in legacy apps, AI can be an enabler that way in figuring out how do you get all these disparate on-prem applications to really hum as one, as opposed to, Frank, who, oh my gosh, Frank's going on vacation for 2 weeks. What are we going to do if something breaks?
We're not going to do anything for 2 weeks until Frank gets back.
Yeah. Yes, and that really does make sure you're competitive.
Yeah.
We'll just wait, because your customers will wait. Oh, they always do. Yeah.
Or if it's something internal like closing the books, that's why it ends up taking you 30 days to close the books, because you've got Frank on vacation, or Frank's a bottleneck in some other way, and he's the only guy that knows how to use that spreadsheet or get the data that you need to tie everything out or whatever.
And there's a lot of AI financials now that close the book in 2 days, 3 days. And think about, if you know where you are, think about the kinds of decisions you can make when you absolutely know your financial position.
Yeah, exactly.
Within days as opposed to weeks. Because even if it's a month, even some of that information now may have aged out.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the U.S. economy, February 28th to today.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, exactly. So,
it's backward-looking information that you're getting even later now. So already financial statements are backward-looking, but now you're backward-looking a month out, or however long it takes to close the books, and that information becomes obsolete, to your point.
Well, and one of the things too that, good, bad, or indifferent, costs very rarely go back down.
Yeah.
And so to your point, so what I was deciding on February 28th, okay, it's a whole new adjustment for, my business and my competitiveness. And that's one of the other things too, relative to AI. And I don't want to make this entirely about AI, but, yes, everyone's going to use AI for reporting, of course, and decision making, obvious. But what's really the impact is business process management or workflows and supply chain resiliency and agility. Very, very important in using AI. And that, again, back to more meaningful work, right? Now you've got these really complex challenges facing you, and if you're hiring somebody with a master's out of college, you want to focus them there, than necessarily have them, doing data entry.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. And this is a question from Laik on LinkedIn that builds a bit on, or it's sort of going that direction you're going with composable ERP or best of breed. But this is a slightly different take here. And the question is, do we really need heavy, bulky monoliths, or can we have lightweight ERP and then customer can build the ecosystem around it? Like I know Salesforce has sort of built their ERP offering on this. Many would say Salesforce is not an ERP system. I probably agree with that, although they have built a platform that allows you to deploy ERP-like apps on top of that. So do you think, what do you think here between these platforms or these ecosystems and or best of breed? How do you see that evolving here where we are today and where we're headed?
Well, I think that's an absolutely great observation, because I really do think customers are in the position of choosing and building their own ecosystem around it. And that's key, so that, we're obviously standards based so that things can, integrate, but with AI, you can make it happen even sooner. And you don't necessarily have to take this entire application and say, okay, I'm going to make this work. And we've seen people do workarounds, and for political reasons, not necessarily replace, but supplement with best of breed. But you're definitely going to see in the customer, in especially in that kind of 0 to 20 users, where resellers are going to become increasingly important, is they're going to be that partner that brings that stuff together and gives the micro vertical understanding, market intelligence, dynamics, and requirements together relative to what those smaller customers are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it's good points. And then Taiwo on LinkedIn has an interesting point. It comes back to something you were talking about a moment ago when you were talking about supply chains, Kristin. And that comment here, I'll have to read a lot of this because it won't show on the screen, but customers need to do more in process definition mapped to their strategic blueprint, line of business, and compliance framework. Need for vendor solution mapping to their business needs and their growth strategy, AI needs for the business, and more. Once customers understand this, it would be helpful for them to have a better relationships with solution vendors leveraging the cloud and AI. So I think, what Taiwo is referring to here is the fact that vendors are constantly creating these new capabilities that you may not even know about. So when you create a process map, you may not be thinking about, well, how could I use AI to do A, B, and C? You may not really fully understand that capability exists. And so how do you find that right balance between knowing what you want to be when you grow up and using that as a way to find and deploy the right software versus leveraging the software capabilities you may not even really fully understand, but listening to that and following that capability to help you improve your business. So when it comes to process improvement, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the technology that comes first that drives the process improvement, or do you drive the process improvement and then choose the technology?
Well, there's a lot to be said for garbage in, garbage out, right? Obviously I've met you in person, so I'm not going to buy an ERP system and all of a sudden be, taller, richer, thinner. Just not going to happen. I'd like to, certainly, especially when trying to reach high things in my kitchen, but no, those things aren't going to happen.
Dollar if I buy their system, that's what I heard. But so you're saying that's just sales messaging?
But what's important to note though is that when we talk about, there's a lot to unpack in that, and I think that you're right. First of all, there are so many options. It's going to be kind of mind-boggling to really formulate the right one. But one of the things I think that we're consistently seeing, though, is people underfunding and under valuing the ability of the employee and the culture to consume new technologies and to adapt. And that's one of the things consistently. And so it's not even just necessarily garbage in, garbage out. It's more about, and I love that observation. So I thank you very much for that, Taiwo, because you do need to consider that. You're literally wasting money if your employees are not ready to consume that software and use it. And also too, with the pressure of PE and PE ownership, it's not like companies can rip and replace anymore. They really do have to make things, they have to make their existing investments work. There was a time, talking about changing of trends, there was a time literally the average life of a CIO was 18 months. You could almost guarantee they'd go to a new company, they'd rip everything out, they'd start all over again with something new. And obviously there was a great time for growth for the ERP vendors. I mean, it was just fantastic. Now PEs are like, no, we've got a 3 to 5 year trajectory with you. What have you bought and how do you make the most out of it, which is asset realization. So again, you have to look at, okay, why aren't people using it? Whether are they not comfortable with it? Is it their culture? And in fact, even in many of the roles, when we would be dealing with a new prospect, it was important to even ask which other vendors are they looking at so that you could understand the culture. With a Salesforce-based ERP, if they were in the mix, well, then you knew you've got a pretty young, fast-moving, highly educated prospect, and you're going to have to sell to that, to somebody else that wants to do a typical discovery cycle and very methodical, where you might be 6 weeks out before you're doing your first demo. Tells you more about, okay, they're very staid, they're very measured. And so you're going to see different vendors like an IFS or a Deltek in a situation like that. SAP, Oracle, NetSuite, very fast and can adapt quickly to customers. But then obviously people are making more political decisions, right? You're not necessarily going to get fired. You may get cursed at because, your project's overrun, but you're still not going to get fired for buying SAP, Oracle, or NetSuite. So, these are the kinds of things that tells you about where the culture is of the company, and really working on change management and the ability to consume and the desire for people to want to change. Implementations is always underfunded. And I think that's, really one of the main, the challenges. They think they can save money there, which is the one place they should not save money, is on the implementation, because it's that learning and the process and understanding that application and the asset that just bought. I mean, do you really want to buy a Lamborghini and let it sit in the parking lot? Look at it.
Right. Yeah. Probably not. Yeah. And that shelfware is, a lot of lost money and revenue, and a lot of the economy is wasted on shelfware. And so getting the value out of it is critical. And what about the flip side of it? This is an interesting question from Don on LinkedIn. But looking at the flip side of it, so one risk that you mentioned, Kristin, is not getting the business value, having shelfware, the Lamborghini sitting in the garage that you never drive. But what about on the flip side, as far as where do you see software solutions in general, ERP software solutions in general, having gaps between your ERP system and your business goals? Are there certain areas where you think ERP systems in general are still pretty weak, or they have a tendency to be weak in certain areas that hold companies back? Or what are some of those blind spots or potential gaps that buyers should be looking for?
Well, consistent with not only the implementation but the training element that goes with it, is I think that to really understand the system and be super functional in your job is a lot. In fact, for many people, it's just too much. And so I think that is the biggest gap, and that people just don't have the time to really understand what's going on, and nor do they have the corporate structure for people to parse out, okay, you're processing sales orders. Sure, there's some things with, your images and your screens with role defining and keeping that very narrow, but a lot of companies don't have a huge IT organization to be able to do those kinds of things. And so I think the problem is that to really understand the system is just way too much. So they find their one path to do what it is they're doing, and they just do it that way, and then they exit out of the system.
Yeah.
And so they're never really going to use it. And I think, that is the bane of ERP. Again, it's not just your circulatory system, it is your heart. So yeah, you're going to want somebody with an advanced degree to do a heart transplant. Absolutely. But in the same respect, when it gets so overwhelming that people really don't engage with the system unless they have to, and they only do it, if you're a salesperson, you're keeping your Salesforce or your Sugar CRM up to date for fear of threat to your compensation plans. I mean, you really are, you're really leaning into the software. And the thing about AI and AI-based applications is they're much more nimble and agile and interactive to you. So you're going to see people use AI point solutions. We were just talking about this earlier, but ERP is 40 years old. And in 40 years, we have about 70 ERP applications. AI is 6 years old-ish, from like Twinkle and I to now. There's over 10,000 AI applications. So you're going to see people who lean into it, picking applications that complement what they want to accomplish. Most notably, and this is another thing too, that can take more disparate data and make that ERP, kind of, if you will, Jimmy's on top of there, to really customize it to what they need to do with adding applications, but these really super light footprint applications.
Yeah. I'm here with Kristin Valentyn. We're providing an overview of the ERP software industry. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
When the soul of the city was laid to rest, and the night's forgotten.
If you're about to embark on the jungle of digital transformation, check out my new book, Welcome to the Jungle. It's a book that just came out in late 2025. It's my second book, and it's a book that focuses on digital transformation failure case studies and talks about the lessons and takeaways from that. It's 300 pages packed of all the lessons and things that I've learned from having been an expert witness in lawsuits related to digital transformations, and also with our team helping clients recover some of their failed projects. I've included as many lessons as I could possibly fit into one book here. You can read this book. You can order it anywhere in the world in hard copy format, which is this format here. You can get it in paperback. You can also get it electronically as well. Scan the QR code right here or go to the links below for your copy. Hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 268. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And we're here with Kristin Valentyn talking about an overview of the ERP software industry. 10, 20 years ago, I would say it would be a lot more relevant to talk about where are the gaps between ERP systems in general, because there were ways that, ERP systems in a lot of ways were still trying to catch up to what the organizational needs were. But now I feel like it's flipped a bit. And it's not that ERP systems have become perfect, because they haven't. But what I think they have done is they've advanced so quickly and so fast, and they provide so many new capabilities to organizations that it's almost too much. And those weren't your exact words, but I'm paraphrasing a bit. But it's almost, for some, it's too much. They can't absorb it. They can't consume it. It's disruptive to the operations. And, it's not because the software sucks in many cases. It's because it's just such a big change for companies. So I think that's the gap. When I think of gaps, that's what I think about, is like, what's the gap between where I am today and what I'm trying to get to, and what's the risk of me moving to that gap? And it's usually not the software's fault that I'm going to struggle to get to, close that gap. And back to your point about training, implementation, all that stuff becomes even more important.
Well, the other thing too that's super important to really lean into is there's not one ERP for anybody, period. So there's always going to be an element of supplementing, best of breed. And so that's, it's important to note that in a best case fit to business scenario is 80%, but an average fit to business is 60%. So to answer your question, Don, about gaps, absolutely there's gaps. And with this also transition where, because it's a commodity, we see more of a financial decision, which is more about risk mitigation, predictability. You have to, you ascertain, okay, I know they're not great, but I know them.
Right.
And I know what my resources, I know what my ecosystem is to support it. I know where my options are to complement it and supplement it. So there's a little bit about that, but as I mentioned, the control really moves back to the customer to create that blueprint.
Yeah. Now, what about, here's a question from Sam Graham on LinkedIn, longtime listener of the show. But Sam says, are there enough experienced implementation consultants to do everything that ERP vendors want to do? So in other words, are consultants keeping up with even just their own knowledge of their own product that they support and that they implement? What are your thoughts here?
I would say every software vendor is resource constrained, and exactly what you're saying, Sam. And here is the dichotomy. What makes them excellent at what they do is what they've done, and not what's gonna happen, but what they've done. And that's actually where firms like Third Stage can be really, really valuable on the what do you want to do, what do you want to accomplish, and that forward vision. And so it's really important that there's that hand in glove with defining that vision. But the other challenge too from a training is, if you're going to be a very successful services firm, regardless of whether it's the software author or an independent, like a reseller or an ISV or even just pure services, just nothing more than, like one of the big four. The long and the short of it is you want an 85% utilization rate of your people, which means they are at customers solving those problems and bringing those customers up to current state. They don't have a lot of cycles to say, okay, now how do we go to the next stage? And that's really where the gap happens. So to make them happy, referenceable, they're going to work with what they have and get them to the current state, but they're not planning necessarily for a future state. And again, that's that hand in glove. So where are they going to get that training? They're not. They're going to look to a Third Stage to be able to say, okay, we know our goals are for the next 5 or 6 years. We have to make sure whatever we're implementing are done now. But it's a difficult dichotomy of making sure your people are relevant and fresh, but yet meeting your billable goals of 85% utilization, and also the value that they provide to the customers as being experts in fact in the past. So that's a very long no. There's not enough resources in the market.
Right. Well, and it's important to know that and go in with your eyes wide open, because it doesn't mean you don't do the implementation or you don't necessarily buy the software. It just means plan accordingly. It's probably going to take you a little longer than you think, and it's probably going to take longer than the vendor thinks too, because of the resource constraints. And we're seeing it. I'd say we're seeing it every implementation we're doing right now, where there's some sort of technical skill set constraints on the project. The ones that you have are good. In many cases, they're fine. It's just there's not enough of them. And so I think that's something that all the vendors seem to be struggling with.
Well, and all people are not created equal. So you've got scheduling things. You also have personality requirements. So you might have the best person on financials out there who cannot get along with the company, right? Just so there's a lot of factors. So it's not just do they have the skill set, the competency, and the vision. Are they somebody that the company, the new customer sees as a virtual team member? And that's a toughie too. Or, oh, yep, we'd love to start your project. We're scheduling 8 to 4 weeks out. 8 to 12 weeks out. What? I just bought this stuff. I'm ready to start now. You can't have somebody start next week.
Right.
So between the personality mix and the scheduling, then all those other things apply. So it's a big no.
Right. Even bigger no now.
Yeah.
Now, how about this from Darian on LinkedIn? Darian says, if companies only have a limited budget, where should they prioritize spending to improve adoption and long-term ROI? Are there certain parts of ERP where you feel like, if companies just got started on these little areas, they get some momentum, they can not bite off more than they can chew, but they can still get a lot of value? Or there's certain, as a broad generalization, which is always risky, but as a generalization, are there certain functions or capabilities that you feel like ERP systems nowadays are particularly high on the ROI side?
Yes, definitely workflow. There's so much time wasted in inefficiencies in regards to whether you're simply, let's just say, processing a PO, or actually, preparing, you're preparing for your shipments, because so many of these systems are so siloed and they're not working as a seamless outcome. And to take that step back and really look at all the pieces and create, outcome-based workflows, and tying your technology in relative to, from the software vendor perspective, we all could do a better job of just delivering outcomes or, workflows. But a company today using AI can really restructure on business process management, of taking a moment and looking at their current processes and linking them together to start skipping steps. So it just simply happens more so and happens in the background, rather than, it can take up to, wait for it, 13 people manually to process an invoice. 13 people.
Yeah.
And so, if you can actually get that automated, so it's happening in the background, and, or your vendors are getting paid. Think about if you're late paying on a vendor, that can have ripple effects to your supply chain, right?
Yeah.
Depending on, and especially depending on what that good is, if there's competition for that commodity. So when you can have all this stuff just happen and people aren't stepping it through, then you're going to have a lot of value. So it's really focusing on the outcome and using AI to help with those business process outcomes.
Yeah, that's great points there. And then I'm actually going to pull up a more of a comment that's a follow-up. It reinforces a lot of what you were just saying. This is a long one. I'm still going to read it anyway because it's really good. This is from Don on LinkedIn. Don says, thank you for clarifying that. Please correct my approach where it is. And after having the C-level and stakeholders aligned on the ERP initiative and a decent budget to be allocated, then the focus should turn to process first, not system first. That's step one that he says is process first, not system first. Second step, clean, governed, and trusted data foundation. And then third, from the people side of ERP, change management, user adoption. So those are what he's saying, or those are his top three areas of focus, or first three areas of focus in the project. What are your thoughts on that? Process, and then data, people.
Well, the first and most important thing is C-level buy-in.
Yeah.
This isn't furniture. If they're not committed to it and, making it happen, it doesn't matter how many new chairs or beautiful offices or, impeccable views. The C-level really needs to be committed to the change. Otherwise, you're throwing things out. You're literally wasting money, because they're going to follow by example. And candidly, companies don't buy software because users are unhappy. They really don't. And that generally becomes about the UI and the usability of it, not necessarily whether the process. But you really do need executives to understand what are the links, what are the weak links in their process. So I definitely agree with process. Because again, it's not just a question of garbage in, garbage out. Most implementations, people are really unhappy because they think they're going to be able to do what they wanted to do, only faster now with the new system. They don't realize they need to do things differently. And, one of the things that I just love this joke, but it's kind of stupid. But how many psychologists need to change a light bulb? One, but the light bulb has to really want to change. But that's
Good one.
and my background, which never would have portended a career in technology, was about social change. And the organization's desire to stay the same is always greater than the desire to change, no matter how much somebody complains. So that's why you first and foremost need to understand the process and what are you marching to. And again, that starts about looking at the competitive landscape and deciding, executive leadership needs to decide where they want to be 2 to 5 years out, and then define those processes to back end it. We used to talk quite a bit about the Amazon effect. It's not just Amazon, it's now the expectation that I get things in hours, no matter where it's from.
Right.
That is disruptive. That Pandora is never going back in the box. But looking to somebody to help, a company in their own research, which can be done extensively with AI tools, and those are the more generic ones like Claude and ChatGPT and Copilot, Gemini, but is to understand what those trends are and plan for it. But again, the executive leadership needs to plan for it. Now, there are 2 other points to that, to the question. This process over software, Don.
And then there was, I think it was data. Let me pull it up again real quick. Sorry, I lost it. It was data.
I think there was a data, and that is...
Yep. Clean, governed, and trusted data foundation was the second one. And then change management and user adoption was the third.
Yeah. So the 1 and 3 are kind of interconnected, but it's really up to executive management to be able to assess their culture and, they're likely to change. But specifically relative to the data, that is one of the exciting things. That has always been the Achilles heel, because who cleans it up? And there are some AI tools that can accelerate that and do that data migration much, much, much faster. And companies can actually do it themselves. So the data migration thing relative to an AI tool is one of the advancements that should streamline, and that literally as recently as 2 years ago was like, yuck. And, now with an AI tool, you can pull things from social media. You can pull things from, your own files, whatever's out there in the universe relative to the web. With LLMs, you can use data wherever. And, if we remember, one of the way back, and I almost hate to talk about it, but, Taiwan was pretty immune to COVID. And why? Because they were monitoring social media. So if you want to find out what's going on in your market, monitoring social media can be huge, because people are going to be bragging about it in some of the most random places. And to be able to pull that into not only the data that you're getting, but also be able to pull it into your decision making, you can see how much more powerful and how much more agile you'll be in the market.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What about, as we're talking about data, I don't want to move too far away from this because it's a good follow-up question here that ties into this. This is from, I'm going to try the name here, Temi Tayo on LinkedIn. I hope I pronounced that right. Maybe I'll call you Temi. If you don't mind, I'll take the liberty of shortening your name. It's easier for me. But Temi says, how does the cloud address the concern of data sovereignty, which is critical to government agencies and ERP deployments? Is this something that you're seeing a lot of conversations around? Where's my data? Like, I get it. I like the cloud, but I need to know where the data is, or maybe there's some restrictions on where I can put the data if I'm a government contractor or a government entity, for example.
Well, both in medical or life sciences and government, those, to your point, really, they pretty much can only be on private cloud. You're just not going to have control. And then also, but data sovereignty has been a huge issue for almost as long as cloud's been in, because if you're really truly dealing with a multinational, they want to know where their data is, and is it in Europe? Is it being housed in Europe if they're European based, or that division is European based? So it's very, very important to know that, and most vendors are prepared to discuss that and have a multi data center approach, whether it's, and I think now we're getting very tribal in our world. So Canadians want to run a Canadian data center, Americans, that's not just Europe has always had the highest standards, but we're seeing more that they want that regional data center kind of data control. There is a funny thing. People also just feel better knowing that it's close. Not close enough that it would be affected by the same disaster that your building would be, but close.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I never stopped to think about how geopolitics can affect cloud strategies, in that the populist and nationalist movement throughout the world is leading a lot of companies or a lot of governments to insist or prefer, at the very least, prefer that data be stored or housed in their, within their own borders.
Yeah, well, GDPR started a lot of that. That's just higher over there, and the protection of individuals' information is higher. The requirement is more intense in Europe. But if you can't, there's no point in creating a data center that doesn't allow for that, because eventually some of your customers are going to grow to be international.
Yeah, yeah. So putting your crystal ball in place here, in thinking about, I always try to think about where the dead ends that we're headed towards, or the pitfalls we're racing towards. And one that I think about a lot is, we're really just, if we think about it, we're really in the first wave of the big first wave of cloud movement, right? I mean, you've had NetSuite's been around for a while, Salesforce, Workday, they've all been around for a while in the cloud. So let's set them aside for a moment, because for a long time they were more the anomaly, or it was sort of a unique business model for them. But for the most part, the mainstream monolithic ERP vendors this is the first move, the big massive shift to the cloud. What I wonder about is 10 to 20 years ago, when companies outgrow those systems, some of those systems become obsolete, and it becomes time to untangle the data from those data centers and from those cloud applications. And now you want to move to a different vendor, a different cloud provider. How does that look? I mean, that's what I worry about. Is that, are we setting ourselves up for even more complicated and risky and expensive migrations in the future, because it's going to be so hard to switch? Or what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think, of course, the vendors want to make it hard to switch.
Right. So you admit that was the plan all along. You're admitting it as an insider.
Yeah, very diabolical to take over the world. And I think there's a certain element, when your data is someplace else, and basically, where your company's running is someplace else, it is very, very scary. But I will say that with some of the tools that are available, like we talked about with data migrations, but also we've seen protections in contracts in the event of an ending of this relationship, who owns the data and making sure it's taken to move, and what's required to move it, who's responsible for it, very, very clear exit strategies as well. Obviously, every good business not only needs to start, but it needs to stop. And so the contract should reflect that. Smaller companies should take a lot of time to look at that, rather than, yes, I can't stand it, I'm working 24/7. I just need a good financial package in, but they really should take that time to look at, what if I'm going to, what happens if I outgrow you? What happens if I'm going to move to a different, software author? How do I move my data seamlessly? And that exit is equally as important as making the decision to start. But sure. See.
Yep. Someone saying SAP is promising $20 billion to expand its sovereign and cloud services, which I know Microsoft is spending heavily in that too, and a lot of vendors are.
Well, and then and Oracle's, Larry Ellison's building that ginormous 1,000-acre data center in Texas.
Yeah.
And so, to your point, it's promising, yes, but with anything that we buy into that's large, there's also limitations and constrictions. And, that's definitely, all due respect, who has the power, right? If you've given all of your stuff to Oracle to run in Texas, yikes. So there's going to be a great story about seamlessness and consistency and some of the things that I just talked about with outcome-based, applications. But that would make me very nervous, because I did read an article as well, is that, Larry's so heavily leveraged at this point. And now, with the other acquisitions, his credit actually rating it's a big bet. And I don't know if I'd want all of my stuff in a big bet. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not to say it's not, because look at, here we are, and Larry's always been in front of things, but it is risk.
Yeah, he's taken big bets throughout the years, and I think Oracle is interesting to watch, because I there's part of me that wonders, like with Oracle in particular, what are they going to be? Or what are they trying to become? Are they trying to become a true application powerhouse that they've been over the years? I know they didn't start that way. They started off as a database infrastructure company, but their DNA has always seemed to gravitate back towards infrastructure type stuff, being a database company first all along. So it makes me wonder, like, I don't think they'll abandon Fusion necessarily, or abandon NetSuite, certainly not. But it makes me wonder, are they really doubling down more on the infrastructure data center side of things? And I'm not saying you can't be both necessarily. You can be an application provider and an infrastructure provider, and but I just think it's different the way they're going about it. Like SAP is more focused on partnering with hyperscalers and trying to build out their cloud solutions that way. I don't know. I don't know if you have a thought on that. Where I know you can't. I don't know when the last time is you spoke with Larry Ellison and asked him what his strategy is, but I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I was busy the last time he called, so I couldn't actually grab his call. No.
Take his call.
No, all kidding aside, though, no, it is very much going back to controlling the entire environment from the infrastructure perspective. And that's why, I was having a really dynamic conversation with Scott Irwin, who's the CEO of Action. They do Infor, Acumatica, Deltek, and Sage. And they actually see an increasing area for them, because they just see AI as one more platform change. So it's not necessarily this new thing we're adding on. It's a platform change, ERP AI. And I do think, everyone says, companies can write their own applications, but who's going to want to? Who's going to want to maintain it? Do you really want, you can do it, but you're going to be relying on, kind of this world of ecosystems to give you that fine-tuned niche focus that helps you maximize the profit. Because it's that, again, we talked about this earlier, it's that niche element in your business is where you're going to find margin and profit and differentiate and higher customer retention. And somebody's got to help you with that. So from the top down, we talked about, third stage, painting that 3 to 5 year, vision. But from the bottom up, we're seeing everybody build out their ecosystems really, really aggressively with their more tier 2 products. And so that they can, really make, in effect, the closest you're going to get to is a custom system for that business.
Yeah.
And that's going to be that nice, again, where that customer is in control and will have multiple options to be able to say, no, thank you. Or I'd like you to do this. Can you do that?
Right. Now, you mentioned something a few minutes ago about the 10,000 applications that have been created with AI since AI was introduced to the masses a few years ago. Do you think that the ERP software category is at risk of being disrupted by a system or a type of solution that we don't even know about yet necessarily? Maybe it's already out there. It just hasn't caught hold yet, or maybe it's yet to be developed. Do you think AI is going to disrupt ERP systems as we know it, beyond just providing new capabilities to the incumbents?
Well, I was reading, I read recently this article by Charles Phillip, who used to be the CEO of Infor. And, while I was there, he was there. And he actually talked, he talked about what some things that they anticipate going away based on AI. And, many of the features and functions in financials will go, certainly people will not be as required in, financial systems management. And so that then begs to think about, okay, so then what happens to the financial systems themselves, right?
Yeah.
The cutover will be longer for something as critical as financials, but they were anticipating something like 7 years before you see, or at least in his white paper, his suggestion was that in 7 years, and that was kind of surprising. Supply chain also, because again, once you start predicting those behaviors and those pattern changes, and you're entering in a few, that's another one that will be, highly automated. Supply chain is an interesting one because I don't know if anybody's really there. There are people who are really good at it, but I don't necessarily know if because it's so dynamic, if that's always been an add-on to ERP.
Yeah.
Maintenance is another one that's really, really going to be important, and that one I can see because all of those schedules, the maintenance routines. And then also too, if you read much about like the Chinese auto market, they now are going to do live updates. So a car can ship before it may or may not be, completely tested. And with a quick software update on the road, well, you're going to see that also on any kind of shop floor with all the major equipment, shipping out the equipment when it might be 85% done, knowing that you'll just do that software update when it's available. And, again, so some of those, and they're more the adjunct other than financials, I think is the probably the only one that might be at risk for being replaced by ERP.
Yeah.
Might be replaced of an ERP system, excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, what oftentimes gets overlooked is AI, as cool as it is, it's, largely based on unstructured data, and ERP systems provide structure and workflows and the backbone of how AI could function. And so it's hard to imagine, I could be wrong, but it's hard to imagine that an AI developed solution somehow is just going to completely overtake monolithic ERP systems. Now, I do think someone out there might have a brilliant design for a new category of ERP or something that they could use AI to build it faster. I think that is a very real possibility. Right. But whether or not AI itself as a technology completely replaces ERP, I have trouble seeing that yet, unless something materially changes. I just think, I try to imagine a Fortune 500 company not running a core ERP system and just using AI to get data from spreadsheets or the cloud storage spaces or whatever. It just seems like that'd be a total mess. And then, data governance obviously becomes a nightmare at that point.
Well, understand AI is a tool. So this new platform of AI is, it's a tool where you point it at. So it's to a certain extent, you have to know what you're asking for. And so let's say hypothetically, you had all of these AI apps, you're still going to have somebody making sure they're all working together. They're all consistent with company standards and regulations and any kind of compliance. So you kind of end up with, okay, yeah, some things are faster and more custom, but somebody still has to have an overarching view of making sure that's all working together, because you're going to end up with, wait, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
You're doing what? And so there's going to have to be some structure, and humans are going to gravitate towards structure because, again, predictability, risk mitigation, repeatability, and which all lead to scalability.
Right. Well, here's a follow-up comment here from Christopher on LinkedIn. We might have identified the next ERP disruption here, according to Christopher. So Christopher says, I think that the impact of AI on ERP is not going to be a replacement, but an evolution of ERP to a better substrate for AI to reason over. Whoops, I just lost the comment here. Making the structure referring to authoritative, I believe this so strongly that I'm the one you're talking about when you say a better version of ERP that AI helped build faster. That's literally my business. So Christopher on LinkedIn is out to build the next ERP thing that we don't know about yet, but it could be the big disruption that we see in a few years from now. So good luck in your journey, Christopher.
And Christopher, I look forward to watching your interview with Eric in a couple of years. So
yeah, just remember, I knew you before you became huge. So just remember that when I call you and ask you to be on the podcast, because Larry still won't return my calls because he has no idea. So I guess just to close things out, Kristin, just to wrap this all up and put a bow on it, if you could give one piece of advice to a CEO or to just a project team in general, leadership team who's about to embark on a major ERP initiative right now here in 2026, what what's the big piece or pieces of advice you'd leave them with?
I would say to really be able to crystallize what problem you're trying to solve. Because as much as that sounds obvious, and it doesn't have to be lofty, but what are you really trying to solve? Is that an exit strategy because that's where your business is? Or do you want to be disruptive? Do you simply just want to placate your, and I shouldn't say this, but do you need to placate your stakeholders? Because let's call a spade a spade. This pressure for stock price is very, very real. And working back from that, and it sounds oversimplified to say what is the problem you're trying to solve, but all your initiatives will flow naturally out of that one. Like, for example, if it is stock price, and valuation. So, you're obviously going to look at efficiencies, but you're also going to look at brand. You're also going to look at growth. So you can see how, what is that one, and really, really crystallize that. If your goal is always to be an innovator, then everything has to be built to that. And the other thing too, I think people have also stopped is they don't necessarily see where the employees fit in delivering on that mission. If you're really going to be an innovator and always be bleeding edge or disruptive technology, are you hiring employees that can keep up and want to do that too?
Right.
So that making sure the whole culture is consistent with and all pointed in that same direction.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it's so interesting as you said it. I was thinking, why is that so profound, or why is that so difficult to adhere to? But yet it's amazing how few leaders clearly could articulate what it is they're trying to accomplish. Like why? It's not, a lot of times companies say, well, because we have to, or because we need to get with the times, or that's true. Yeah, you probably do, but you have to have a better reason than that. What do you want your business to be? How do you want the technology to impact your business? What do you want it to look like for your customers, your employees, all that stuff? But it's such a basic, simple thing, but yet just companies don't always follow that advice.
Well, and it's important to know because they are very much in the news, but that recent layoff, I mean, that's a company that kind of treats employees like commodities. They just burn and churn. And so, huh?
Are you talking about Oracle with the 30,000 people laid off in a 6 a.m. email like that? That was a bad look for sure, bad PR for them, I imagine.
Yeah, and so that's really something to think about is, what kind of culture are you stating and creating? And at the same time, are you hiring for the attributes you need for your success? Like creativity, sense of urgency, collaborative, there's a fair amount of, commitment. Yeah. But, is it a creative, curious culture?
Well, thank you again for your time, Kristin. Thanks to the audience for the great questions and feedback. Really good discussion there. We're going to dig into some of those threads here in just a moment. We're also going to get into why ERP projects fail, the real root cause of failure, which is not the fault of any one person, but instead it's actually the fault of an entire system. And we're going to talk about that system later in the show. So we've got a lot more to cover. Be sure to stick around. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A.
If you're leading a digital transformation or ERP initiative and you want to avoid the costly mistakes that most organizations make, that's where Third Stage Consulting comes in. We are an independent and technology advisory firm, meaning that we don't sell software, we don't take commissions from vendors. Our only job is to protect your interests and be on your side. We help executives and project teams plan, deliver, and recover digital transformations and ERP projects, reducing risk, improving adoption, and delivering real business value. If you want clarity before you commit to your digital strategy, or if something feels off track to you, feel free to reach out to us at thirdstage-consulting.com, and my team and I would be happy to help.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 268. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. And Darian, we just had Kristin on the show, talked a lot about different ERP software vendors, trends in the space, where we're going to cloud and AI, all that good stuff. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways?
Yeah, you guys definitely covered a lot of different topics. I would say one of the things I found super interesting was when you guys were talking about shelfware, and I think you guys mentioned how much money is wasted on shelfware and the unused functionality of these platforms. One question I have with that, Eric, for you, based on the conversation, was what separates companies that actually realize value from the ones that never fully adopt the system?
Well, I think the big ones, there's two things. I mean, one is obviously the ones that implement successfully and effectively the first time, the first time around, they're the ones that are going to get more value. But it's not enough to say, we implemented, we went live, and did we get value? Yes or no? Usually it's more of a sort of, yeah, we sort of got value. We didn't get everything we wanted, or, there's still a lot more work we have to do. And so I think it's one thing to implement well, that's step one, but step two is to optimize. And so many companies don't take the time to optimize the investment after go live, largely because people are exhausted by the time you go live. I mean, typically, if you have multiple phases, that phase of the project is people are either worn out and tired and they want to get back to their day jobs, and or they are being pressured to move on to the next phase of the project. So let's move on to the next thing, the next wave of functionality or whatever. And they spend maybe a couple weeks or a few weeks on hypercare, or just stabilizing things, making sure, the operations don't come to a halt. And then they move on to either their day jobs or the next phase of the project. So I think we have to change the way we think about these projects and think about it as a longer term journey, longer term optimization. Even once you've finished the entire project phase by phase, you still want to be going back and continuously improve, continuously identify where the software vendor might have capabilities you didn't know about or you haven't deployed yet, and just constantly change and tweak and fine tune. And I think that's companies that build a center of excellence or a competency in-house to constantly improve their systems rather than waiting 10 or 20 years when it's time to replace it. Those are the ones that get the most value out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you guys talked about AI workflows and automation as well. And I like the way that you guys were talking about how AI-enabled outcome-based workflows and automating things like invoice processing is some of the first things that companies can do. In your opinion, what are the best processes companies should target first, maybe besides invoice processing, to get quick wins with AI?
Well, Kristin talked a little bit about it with supply chain management. I think there's a lot within supply chain management that companies could be using AI for, just because it's typically involves multiple moving parts, a lot of different pieces of data, and a lot of human intervention and human analysis. And AI is perfect for that, to help that, because you think about all the spreadsheets that supply chain planners use and emails they have to send back and forth with customers and internal people. There's just a lot of stuff to manage, a lot of data to manage, a lot of noise, and AI can reduce a lot of that. So I think AI or supply chain is a really good area to start, but that only works if you've got good data and you've got solid processes as a starting point. If you try to put AI on top of that, a broken process or data that sucks, it's not gonna go very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And my last point that I really like that you guys talked about was how companies building ecosystems around ERP instead of relying on one system definitely have maybe a little bit of an edge sometimes. But for you, Eric, what does the future look like with more of a composable architecture rather than a single or ERP for these businesses?
Well, I think it's, I don't think we're ever going to settle the debate of which is better. One single ERP system or a composable best of breed multiple system option, or is it some sort of middle ground or hybrid? I think the pendulum is always kind of swinging back and forth in the in between part of that. So I think the good news is it just creates a constant flow of opportunity and innovation, because anytime a software vendor starts to get traction about this around the single ERP's model, then you start to see cracks in the foundation and weaknesses of that model, and then you've got a bunch of upstarts that'll try to fill the void. It's how Salesforce and Workday, for example, became such prominent enterprise tech providers, is because they chose to attack the monolithic single ERP model and provide a better mousetrap for one part of ERP. And as that pendulum swings back towards the Salesforces and the Workdays of the world, then the pressure then is, well, how do we integrate? How do we have a single source of truth? How do we move more towards one single set of operating tools? And it's almost like it never gets resolved. The philosophy or the philosophical debate is never going to be resolved. It's more a matter of figuring out where on that continuum or on that spectrum you need to be as a business based on where you're going.
Absolutely. Well, what a great conversation today with Kristin. I know she's been on a couple other times, but definitely interesting to see what she thinks is going on in the future of the industry.
Yeah, she's always good to have on. We'll have to have her back on in the future as well. She's a wealth of information, and I'm glad to have her. So thanks again, Kristin Valentyn, for being here. We're going to shift gears, and in this last segment, we're going to play you a YouTube video that we published recently that talks about the systemic breakdown between customer, vendor, and consultant or system integrator, and how it's that interaction or that intersection of the three parties in a digital transformation that inadvertently cause the breakdowns and failures that happen. So let's roll the clip and we'll come back and talk about this topic, which is why ERP projects really fail. And the spoiler alert here is that it's not pointing fingers at any one party, but it's looking at the overall system and the systemic breakdowns in these sorts of projects.
On the surface, we always talk about how projects fail. We look at the failure rate being extremely high, at 80% plus in most cases, a number that hasn't changed in the decades that I've been doing this. And it's easy to blame people here. It's easy to blame a software vendor. It's easy to blame the system integrator, the consultants. It's easy to blame yourself. It's easy to blame the client that's implementing technology. But the reality is there's a systemic breakdown and a systemic problem in the technology space that is designed to sell software, but it's putting the odds against you, the end customer. And that's what I want to talk about here today. Is I want to unpack the machine and talk about what it means and how the conflicts of interest and the discrepancies in the machine are creating problems for end customers, and why ultimately it's causing digital transformations to fail at an alarming rate. Now, before I dive in, if you'd like to learn more about some of the lessons we have from having helped so many digital transformation project teams throughout the world, be sure to read our ebook called Lessons from 1,000 Digital Transformations. You can find that by scanning the QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. So when I talk about being inside the machine of technology, what exactly is it? Well, there's three dimensions of the machine that I'm going to talk about and unpack one by one here today. So these are the three major components of the tech machine. You have the clients, the end company that's going through the digital transformation. These are the ones that are buying new technology. These are the ones trying to improve their business. Then you have the software vendors, the technologists, the people that provide the technology backbone of digital transformation. And then you have consultants and system integrators. And as we go through this here today, I'm going to explain to you how these three pieces of the machine all come together to create somewhat of a flywheel, but it's not a flywheel in a good way. And the way Jim Collins talks about it in Good to Great, this is good to worse, I would say, or bad to worse in terms of how this flywheel works. It's a flywheel that doesn't bode well for the client, but it does bode very well for the vendor and consultants. And that's what I'm going to unpack here throughout the rest of today's video. So let's start with the client. This is the end customer organization going through the digital transformation. What are their priorities? Let's start there because this is important. In theory, this piece should be the center of the machine, but unfortunately it's not, and that's by definition and by design. So if I could redesign the machine, I'd put the client in the middle, but they're not. But having said that, let's talk about what the client, what the end customer wants. They want to modernize. They want to reduce tech debt. So they want to get rid of that old crappy system. They want to get rid of all the complicated customization. They want to be on a more modern cloud-based platform. They want to take advantage of AI. There's all these different things that a client wants out of technology. It all sounds good so far. No problems yet. We'll get to the problems later, but this is what the client wants so far. They also want to simplify operations and technology. So part of their job is to simplify. They want business value. And they want an ROI. At the end of the day, more than anything, organizations want an ROI. They want to know that there's a cost-justified return on what they're about to spend money on. And in addition, they also want long-term flexibility. So they don't want to be locked in. They don't want to be in a situation they can't get out of. They don't want to be in a situation that are going to escalate in cost. They don't want to be in a situation that's hard to change later. So these are all things that the clients want. Sounds basic enough, sounds good so far, but what we're going to talk about today is not whether or not these are valid, because these are very valid reasons why customers go through digital transformations, but instead what I want to do is talk about why these other two pieces of the machine completely override and overpower these concerns and priorities that the client has. Now we've talked about what the client wants, what their priorities are. Let's talk about the vendor. Vendors want, of course they want revenue, we all want revenue, but more specifically they want annual recurring revenue, ARR. This is a really important number. You don't have to be a finance person to know what this means. Every person in the tech space should understand this, even if you're not a software vendor. Annual recurring revenue is basically when you have cloud subscriptions, you're not just making a sale as a vendor that's worth a fixed amount of money. You're making a sale that's recurring every year. And investors love this. Investors love companies, software vendors in particular, that can maximize their annual recurring revenue, which is why the cloud movement is so powerful right now. There's so much money chasing the adoption of the cloud. And most of that money, by the way, is not coming from clients. It's coming from investors. So the more vendors can convince clients to increase the vendor's ARR, the better off this vendor is going to be, regardless of the fact that more often than not, the vendor's priority here conflicts with some of these priorities over here. And I'm going to come back to that point here in a moment. But first and foremost, software vendors want revenue, and more specifically, they want annual recurring revenue. They also want to lock you in as a customer. And the term vendor lock generally has a negative connotation, but in terms of the vendor, it's actually a positive thing. If a vendor can get you, the customer, locked into a long-term contract, and if it's a situation where it becomes very difficult to get out of that contract, either because the contractual terms are prohibitive, or because what's even more likely is because moving from a cloud platform to another in the future is going to be extremely difficult. And we haven't even started to feel that pain yet because we're still in the first wave of cloud adoption here in the mid-2020s. So vendor lock is a dream for vendors, and it also fuels this predictable ARR that investors are looking for. Software vendors that are focused on the cloud, which most of them are, cloud and SaaS solutions, they want vanilla adoption. Not because it's best for your business, but because they can't scale their cloud solutions if everyone's out there deploying the software in a different way and doing all this customization. They need you, the end customer, to fall into line into their generic vanilla off-the-shelf software so that they can scale. So they can sell their same software that they're selling to you, they can sell it to thousands or tens of thousands of other customers without breaking the model, without breaking the system, and while also maximizing their profit. The more customization and variation that exists out there, the harder it is for them to do that. And then the final thing I'll say is that the vendor wants you to start now. They want you to implement today, not next month, not next year, now. Reason for that is because the meter starts running, your annual recurring revenue that you're paying the vendor starts ticking in today, and now they can maximize the revenue even while you're still trying to figure out how you're going to use the software. They're already making their money before you've received an ounce of business value. They're already making significant money on you through these annual subscriptions. So this is what a vendor wants. Next, I'm going to talk about what consultants want, the system integrator, the technical implementers, and then I'll talk about how this whole machine is designed to benefit these two parties and why that's in conflict with what the end customers want. So let's talk about what the technical consultants or the system integrator want. What they want, just like the software vendor, they want to start now. They're services companies. They make money by staffing a small army of people on your project. So they want you to start tomorrow. They don't want you to take time to plan. They don't want you to get ready. They don't want you to mobilize your own team. They want you to start now because they can start billing 1, 2, 10, 20, 50, maybe even 100 or more different people on your project, and that's significant revenue for them. So they want to start now whether you're ready or not. And not only do they want to start now, they want to ramp up fast. They don't want to just have the project lead showing up tomorrow or just the process leads. They want their entire army of consultants showing up as quickly as possible. So they want to start now and they want to ramp up their team very quickly. They also want control and ownership. And this is a really dangerous one. And this is especially true for the larger system integrators, the big 4 consulting firms, and even some of the larger tier 2 system integrators and consulting firms. Technologists, as a stereotype, tend to be purists. They tend to be believers that drink the Kool-Aid. They think their software can do no wrong, and anything that disrupts their model and their view of the world is a threat to them. And so I would say consultants and system integrators more than anyone have change management issues and resistance to change issues because they don't like the idea of a client having too much say, an outside third-party consultant having too much say. They want control over the project. Part of this is also self-serving because the more control and ownership they have, the more budget they're going to consume.
If you're spending $10 million on a project, and let's just say 3 to 4 million of that is going to the vendor, they want to consume that remaining 5 or 6 million as much as possible in their wheelhouse here, even though the reality is there's so much more money and time that should be spent on other things outside the realm of what the tech consultants do that are even more important to the success of the project. So they want control and ownership of the project for those reasons. They also have a myopic tech focus. So their job, in their minds at least, is to deliver technology that works from a technical perspective. It may or may not work from a user adoption and a business value and an operational perspective, but they, in their statements of work, are really good at writing contracts that ensure that all they really have to do is deliver technology that works. You're typically the one responsible for training. They'll train your trainers, but typically you're going to have to go train the people out in mass. You're the one that's going to have to figure out how to change your business to fit the technology, and God forbid you can't do that. You're going to have to try and figure out how to change their technology to fit your business, which that creates a whole nother set of problems. You're the one that's going to have to figure out how to move your data out of those old legacy systems. You're the one that's going to have to figure out how to decommission the technologies that you have today. You're the one that's going to have to upskill your team to be able to survive and operate in this new environment. So there's a lot of responsibility that fall on you, the end customer, that is not their responsibility. And their responsibility is on technology. Now, you could argue that's not the way it should be, but that is the way it is in the industry as of right now. And then I want to talk about one other thing that is on the minds of most consultants and system integrators, and I'll talk about it from the perspective of what they're not and what their focus is not. Their focus is not on business outcomes. And that's worth calling out, even though I've alluded to it already, that's worth calling out as a separate point here, because you can deliver all these things that the vendor and consultant has promised, but if you're not getting business value and you've spent a lot of money on that technology without any value to show for it, that's a problem, and that's a broken part of this machine. And speaking of broken parts of the machine, let's shift gears now to talk about the conflicts of interest here and why this machine works so well for vendors and system integrators, but not so well for the end customers. Now, I believe I've alluded to this already, but it's worth calling out more explicitly the conflicts in this machine. You would hope and think that the client would be the beneficiary of this machine. They are not. If you look at this picture right here, you have to ask yourself, who are the 2 of the 3 parties that are going to succeed and are going to come out ahead with this project with the least amount of risk compared to the third? And that answer is clearly the vendors and system integrators. Regardless of how well this project goes or doesn't go, they will be okay. They will make their money in their long-term subscription contract. They've made their services money, whether you like the value you got out of it or not. You are the one that took on all the risk. You're the one with the cost. You're the one with the business value that may or may not materialize. And ultimately, if heads start rolling or there's pressure or blame to go around, yeah, they might get some of it, but chances are pretty high it's going to reside here. So clients are in an unfortunate situation because not only are they taking on a huge amount of risk with all the upside going over here, all the guaranteed upside that is, but also you look at the way this machine is rigged against client interest. Beyond that, not just because they take on all the risk, but the risk itself is materializing here because their self-interest at the vendor level is to lock you in, get you paying as much money as possible for their recurring revenue, and that recurring cost never goes away, it never decreases, it only increases. So again, they have all the upside, you have the downside because that cost is going to increase. They want you to conform your business to their software so they can scale their business and make more profit, but that ends up disrupting your business in some way. Even if it works out okay in the long term, it's still going to disrupt your business. And the fact that they want you to start paying now for software that isn't delivering value yet is another way that it's rigged against you. Same with system integrators. They want to start now, they want control, they want you to focus on technology, they don't want to focus on business outcomes. That is in complete direct conflict with what your goals as an end customer are. You want to modernize, you want to reduce tech debt, all the stuff we talked about. So this is the unfortunate reality of the machine. I would love to say that we are going to change this and follow these 5 steps and we will dismantle this machine and destroy it. That's not true, but what we will talk about in the next section is what you can do to navigate this machine more effectively and make sure that you don't get consumed by it. I opened this video by talking about the song Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd, and there's a quote in that song where they say, "What did you dream? It's all right, we told you what to dream." So it's a sort of draconian, dystopian view of the world, that song,
And I think that song actually does apply to the technology industry because they want you to follow their rules. They want you to conform to their way of doing business, what's in their best interest, and it really doesn't matter if it's in your best interest or not. So that's the bad news. That's the way the machine is built. No one of us here watching this video are going to be able to change this, but what we can do is manage this machine and get it under control. That's what I want to talk about next. So what can you do? Well, there's a few things you can do here. One is you just need to understand that the machine exists and that it's rigged against you, and be okay with that. I'm not saying this to alarm you or to make you freak out or tell you that you shouldn't move forward with a modernization or a digital transformation project, but just knowing how the machine is wired is super important, and most people don't really think about that when they enter these projects. So understand the machine is number one. Number two is to do a phase zero planning project before you ever start implementing. This is a way for you to take control and to mitigate these risks over here in many ways. You don't want to start the project now. I would say don't do this now. They want you to, don't do it. Don't give control and ownership to the SI. Get rid of that. Take control, get your PMO in place, have someone, even if you don't have them internally, have someone that represents your interests and manages your PMO so that they're in control, not just the vendors. The tech focus is fine. You can still have a tech focus, but not the myopic focus that vendors have. You definitely don't want this one. You want your phase zero to focus on how can we get business outcomes. And then over here, this one you can't get away from. That's just the way it is. You're going to end up paying money, probably more money than you want, probably for longer than you like, but tech today is more expensive than it's ever been. But if you do a phase zero and you plan this carefully, you can avoid vendor lock and you can avoid this problem here, which is just conform your business to fit the software. There are ways around that. Phase zero will help you figure out where this technology fits your business and where it doesn't, and where you might look for custom developed solutions or third-party bolt-ons, whatever the case may be. But having a deliberate strategy and a clear strategy as part of a phase zero is one of the most important things you can do. And along those same lines is to have a clear strategy and plan. And again, this is not a tech strategy. I'm not talking about the vendor strategy that they've given you or the system integrator strategy. I'm talking about your business strategy. What is your transformation strategy? It will include pieces from the vendor and the system integrator up here, but that's just one piece of it. You have all these other pieces like change management, internal alignment, data migration, architecture integration, multiple technology work streams, all these different things you're trying to manage. You want to have a clear strategy and plan to help you get there. The other thing that will help is to have a non-vendor PMO. The last person you want to put in charge of your overall project is your vendor and system integrator. May sound crazy, but it's not, and here's why. Your system integrator and your vendor are providing you one work stream within a broader program. You need someone to manage the overall program. All the other stuff besides technology, besides this one technology. So you need someone that can look at the bigger picture, represent your best interest, and not having the fox guarding the hen house in terms of the vendor or the system integrator doing that for you. And then finally, look for independent help. Look for people that you trust, people that can help you manage this machine, and someone that can help give you some firepower and ammunition and knowledge to be able to manage this machine. It's a big, gnarly machine. It can get out of control quickly. This machine is why so many projects fail, but by having that outside third-party help like our team at Third Stage Consulting, that's one way that you can help navigate this whole thing.
So that was the YouTube video that we published recently that talks about why ERP projects fail and how the reasons for failure, the real root causes, are a lot more complicated and deep-seated than some might realize. But what were your thoughts and takeaways from that video, Darian?
Yeah, I think to start, one thing I found super interesting was your framing around digital transformation as a machine, because it shifts the conversation away from blaming one bad vendor or one bad product team and toward a bigger structural incentive that keep failure rates really high for these companies. But I have a follow-up question with that topic as well. Eric, in your view, what is the single biggest structural issue that creates this misalignment?
That's a good question. It's hard to pick on one, but I'd say it's, I mean, I don't know if it's too broad, but I'd say the money. I mean, the money is too great. You know, if you follow the money and you look at what investors need and want from software vendors, that's where it all starts. It's the appetite for profit, you know, which has always been there, but it's just it's such a massive scale now with cloud. I mean, valuations are so high and there's so much money chasing cloud vendors and providers now. And now you add AI to the mix, and now there's even more money chasing it. So with that money and that pressure on the profit side of things, that just inadvertently is going to inevitably create more pressure amongst the consultants and the system integrators to push that same narrative. And unfortunately, that puts more pressure on the customers to figure out how to manage the tsunami of pressure that comes with that. And so that's why, turning and trying to find objective, unbiased information is so difficult in the industry, because the profit motive is overwhelmingly in favor of spin and putting out marketing white papers and briefings about how awesome, cloud and AI all are and how you should be investing heavily in it right now. So I think that if I had to pick one thing, I'd say it's that deep-seated profit motive and the appetite for high valuations among cloud and AI providers.
That definitely makes sense. My last question I have to kind of wrap all of this up for you, Eric, is for organizations that are already deep into a implementation and realizing that the machine is working against them, what can they do midstream to take back control without blowing up the project?
Good question. And I think that's the key, is you don't want to blow up the project. You're not going to change the machine. You're not going to dismantle it. I would love to say that I have the answer to how you can avoid the machine. The machine's there. It's operating in the background whether you want it to be or not. So the question is, how do you manage it and make sure you don't get managed by it? And so I think just, first of all, understanding how the machine works is the first thing. And that's why my book that comes out shortly later this month is called Welcome to the Machine. And it talks a lot more detail about what is in this video. And then the reason I wrote it is because I think it's really important for people to understand how it all works, whether you're a buyer of technology or you're going to go through an implementation, or even if you're a consultant or a vendor, you just have to, I think it's important to understand how it affects customers and how this all comes together to create problems unintentionally. And so we just have to be aware of it. That's the first step. And then the second step is to have the right governance in place and the objective purview or the objective expertise to be able to manage the machine to your advantage. And that's why third stage exists, is because we can be that agnostic provider that can push back on the machine, or at the very least make sure the machine doesn't consume you as a buying or an implementing organization.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense.
Good stuff. Well, thanks for the great discussion points there. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. Thanks for Kristin for being here as well. We'll have new episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you want to go watch any of the past episodes, be sure to check it out, transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage can help you in your initiative, or you'd like to bounce around ideas or just talk about your project, I'd be happy to chat with you. So reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll hope you all have a great week, and we'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.